Today, we're diving into a story from 1960, where a dispute over a tiny piece of land spiraled into a massive constitutional crisis. And it all revolved around one profound question. Can a government just give away a piece of its own country? This is the fascinating story of the Berubari Union Case.
I mean, think about it for a second. Can a government, with just the stroke of a pen, decide to hand over a part of its land and, all the people living there to another country? It's a huge question with even bigger implications. And this was the explosive issue right at the heart of the Berubari case.
So, what kicked this all off? Well, in the years after the incredibly difficult partition of India, there were still a lot of border disputes lingering. In an effort to try and smooth things over, the prime ministers of India and Pakistan made a deal. And part of that deal was a really controversial idea to transfer a small territory, the Berubari Union number 12, from West Bengal in India over to what was then East Pakistan.
As you can imagine, that decision sparked immediate outrage and a full-blown constitutional crisis. People were asking, wait, can the government just redraw the map of India like that? Can they just cede our territory? The question was so fundamental, so important, it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court for an answer.
And this brings us to the first major legal battleground. What are the limits of Parliament's power? The whole dilemma was this. Does the power to change the borders of states inside the country also give you the power to shrink the country's external borders? The answer was, well, nobody was sure. Okay, so here's where the legal nerds really had a field day. The government's argument was, hey, we can do this under Article 3 of the Constitution. That's the article that lets Parliament alter state boundaries with just a simple majority vote. But the opponents fired back, saying, whoa, not so fast. Giving away sovereign territory, what lawyers call secession, is a totally different ballgame. They argued that an act this big required a formal constitutional amendment, which is a much, much harder process under Article 368. So you see, it all boiled down to this one question. Is giving a piece of your country away the same as just redrawing a line between two of your own states? The entire agreement, the entire crisis, hinged on that very question. And believe it or not, this wasn't even the only constitutional puzzle in play. Because this case also put the very soul of the Indian Constitution on trial. Its preamble. You know these words. They're iconic. They're the grand opening statement. The argument here was that the preamble, which declares India a sovereign republic, isn't just fancy writing. It actually sets the fundamental rules of the game. It's the promise made by we the people. So the challengers in the case made a pretty clever argument. They said that giving away territory without the people's consent fundamentally violates the whole idea of sovereignty that's laid out right there in the preamble. They were basically claiming the preamble wasn't just a poetic intro, it was a real limit on the government's power. Could the spirit of the Constitution actually stop a law? So the whole nation held its breath. How was the Supreme Court going to untangle these two huge questions? Well, the court delivered a truly landmark verdict with a clear two-part answer that would go on to shape Indian law for decades. The court tackled both issues head-on. First, the power to give away territory, and second, the legal power of the preamble itself.
First things first, the court had to make a really critical distinction. It defined secession of territory as the formal act of handing over your sovereignty to another nation. And the court declared this is absolutely 100% not the same thing as just changing the boundaries of a state inside India.
So, on that first question, the court's answer was crystal clear. Giving away national land reduces the sovereignty of the entire nation. That's a fundamental change, not some simple administrative tweak. And for that reason, it cannot be done by an ordinary law. If you want to do it, you have to meet the super high bar of a constitutional amendment under Article 368. Now, here's the part of the verdict that really raised some eyebrows. The court ruled that while the preamble is, and I quote, a key to open the mind of the makers, it is not legally a part of the Constitution. And if it's not part of the Constitution, it can't be a source of power or a limit on power. In their view, it was an introduction, not an enforceable rule.
All right, so that was the verdict. But what does it all mean in the long run? Why are we still talking about it today? Well, the Berubari case wasn't just about one little piece of land. It set legal precedents that are still incredibly important.
The legacy of this case is really threefold. First, it put up a huge constitutional wall, making it very difficult to just give away national land. Second, it protected the integrity of India's borders, saying you can't change them with a simple law.
And finally, it kicked off a decades-long debate about the true role of the preamble in the Constitution.
But, and this is a really important but, the story doesn't end there. Because law evolves. While the Berubari case set this precedent about the preamble, it wasn't the final word. In fact, more than a decade later, another landmark case came along, case of Ananda-Bharati, and the Supreme Court actually reversed this part of the decision, declaring that the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. Berubari, though, was the crucial first step that got that whole conversation started.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on. The Berubari case forced everyone to ask, what is a preamble actually for? Is it just a poetic introduction, or is it something more? Is it the guiding light, the very soul of the document that shapes how we're supposed to read everything else? It's a question that students of law, and frankly all of us as citizens, are still grappling with today.